They leapt into the sky chasing records, freedom, and immortality. But not all of them made it back alive. From tangled parachutes to deadly flat spins, these are the most haunting skydiving tragedies ever caught on record. When the dream of flying collides with the unforgiving pull of gravity, what happens in those final, irreversible seconds? On August 1st, 1992, the sky above Paris Valley, California, was a bright canvas of blue streaked with thin white clouds. The air smelled faintly of dry grass and jet fuel, the sun already heavy in the sky, though it was only 9:15 a.m. The sound of cicadas buzzed in the fields beyond the runway, mixing with the roar of small planes lifting into the air. Among the crowd of jumpers preparing for their turn was a man named David Collins, age 34, a carpenter who had saved every extra dollar for this day. He was strong from years of lifting beams and tools, but his heart carried more than muscle. It carried the dream of flight. He had read about heroes who jumped from planes, men who seemed to break free from gravity itself. To David, skydiving was not just sport but proof that a man could be both small and great at once. He pulled on his jumpsuit, red with a white stripe, feeling the rough fabric scratch against his skin. The harness was heavy on his shoulders, 40 pounds of straps, clips, and metal rings pressing close to his chest. He tugged on his helmet, adjusting the chin strap until it bit against his jaw. Friends clapped his back, laughing, though one of the more seasoned jumpers gave him a look that carried warning. "Check your lines twice," the man said quietly. His eyes narrowed with concern. The plane's engines coughed to life, and David's heart kept pace with the growl, fast and full. At 9:26 a.m., the group of jumpers boarded a small twin otter plane, the cabin tight and smelling of oil and metal. David sat near the door, his knees pulled close to his chest. As the plane climbed, the air inside grew colder, and the roar of the propellers filled every corner. Through the small window, he saw the ground flatten into a patchwork of farms and roads. At 3,000 feet, his ears popped, and he swallowed hard. At 10,000 feet, his palms grew slick, and the leather of his gloves stuck to his skin. At 12,500 feet, the light inside the cabin turned green. His instructor leaned in, checking the clips, pulling hard at the straps, giving a thumbs up. "Remember," the man said through the noise, "arch your back, count, then pull." David nodded, the words like steel in his mind. The door slid open with a metallic groan, and the rush of air punched into the cabin. It carried the dry smell of sky at altitude, thin, sharp, and endless. The jumpers shuffled toward the door, one after another, bodies vanishing into the blur. David's turn came. He felt the edge beneath his boots, the roar of the world pulling at him, the weight of both fear and dream. He drew one deep breath, filled his lungs, and stepped into the void. At first, the fall was quiet, just a rush of wind against his ears, and a sharp sting of cold against his face. His body tumbled forward, then leveled as he arched his back just as he had practiced. The land stretched below, fields and roads shrinking, the horizon wide and curved. He felt alive, more alive than in any moment before. His altimeter ticked, 8,000 feet, then 7,500, then 6,500. At 5,000 feet, he reached for the cord. The chute opened with a violent snap. Fabric bloomed above him, white and wide, catching the wind. Relief rushed through his body like a wave. He breathed, chest shaking, eyes wide as the world steadied. For a heartbeat it seemed perfect, the dream whole and shining. But then the canopy twisted. The lines tangled tight, pulling the chute into a hard spiral. The straps dug into his shoulders, jerking his body side to side. Below, on the landing field, voices rose in alarm. One instructor shouted, "Cut away," but the words vanished into the wind. David tried to kick free, pulling hard at the toggles, but the fabric only spun tighter. His altimeter spun downward. 4,000 feet, 3,000. Panic gripped his chest. The world rushed up fast, the wind now a scream instead of a song. In the control booth, the radio crackled as spotters counted seconds, their voices tight. Rescue jumpers prepared. Though everyone knew the truth, time was slipping away. He yanked at the reserve handle, metal cold in his glove, but the cords jerked and tangled in the mess above him. The ground loomed closer. Observers shielded their eyes, caught between hope and dread, every second sharp, every breath heavy. At 9:28 a.m., the plane banked left, and the sky opened wide beneath David's boots. He leaned forward, his body heavy against the straps, and then he was out, falling through the cold air like a stone. The first second was nothing but silence, then the wind roared so loud it filled his ears, drowning out every other sound. The rush of air slapped his cheeks, sharp and icy, and the skin beneath his helmet prickled as though 1,000 needles were pressed against him. For 3 long breaths he felt free, the earth below shrinking, the sky above endless, and for a moment he thought he was flying rather than falling. His altimeter needle spun fast, 11,000 feet, 10,000, 9,000, and his body held steady, arms stretched wide, legs bent just right, the way his instructor had taught him. At 7,000 feet, he knew the point of no return had come. He reached for the cord, fingers tight on the handle, and pulled. The main chute opened in a blast, fabric snapping loud like a gunshot. The harness jerked his shoulders and chest hard, stealing the air from his lungs. For an instant, all seemed safe. A white canopy spread wide above him, 35 feet across, its smooth curve holding the air. The spin of the fall slowed, the world steadied, and his body hung quiet, swaying like a leaf. Relief flooded him, and he shouted into the sky, his voice lost to the wind. But then came the first twist. The chute's lines crossed, one cord wrapping around another, pulling the fabric into a sharp angle. The canopy shivered and buckled. The harness yanked at his shoulders as the chute spun him sideways, the horizon tilting like a sliding picture. He pulled hard on the toggles, trying to right the spin, but each tug only made the cords tighten more. Below, the landing field grew larger, the patchwork of dirt and grass no longer distant but rushing closer with each heartbeat. His altimeter read 5,500 feet. The spin worsened. On the ground, instructors raised their binoculars. One shouted, "He's in a spiral." Another waved arms to the rescue team waiting near the field. The sound of engines hummed as a second plane circled, ready to drop a jumper to assist, but there was no time. The air burned David's face as the chute dragged him in tight circles, the horizon spinning fast, sky and land switching places so quick he could not tell which way was up. His chest felt heavy, his breaths came short. The thought of cutting the main chute and pulling the reserve rushed into his head. At 4,000 feet, he pulled the metal handle on his right side. The ripcord slid free with a jolt, the motion sharp against his glove. But the tangled lines above did not release clean. The reserve chute burst from its container, a bloom of fabric fighting against the twisted mess of nylon already stretched tight. The two chutes tangled, cloth against cloth, cords knotted, pulling him into a tumble even faster than before. Observers on the ground gasped, their voices rising, the word tension knot passing between them like a curse. The clock ticked fast in the minds of the spotters. At 3,500 feet, the fall was still recoverable. At 3,000 feet, hope slipped thinner. At 2,500 feet, the rescue jumper stepped from his own plane, body arrowed into the wind, but he was already too far to reach in time. Every second was a hammer beat. The wind tore through David's jumpsuit, flapping the fabric so hard it stung his legs. His eyes blurred, the ground now clear enough to show fence lines, cars and people looking skyward with hands shielding their faces. David's heart thumped so loud it echoed in his head. He yanked the toggles again and again, arms burning, but the lines refused to give. His body spun fast, a blur, each turn pulling blood into his skull, until his vision spotted black. The reserve chute fluttered half-collapsed, the main chute strangled by cords, both pulling him down faster and faster. At 1,500 feet, the scream of the wind turned sharp, and the dirt field below grew into a hard plain of brown and yellow. On the ground, silence took hold of the crowd. Some turned away, others held their breath. The seconds stretched, long and cruel, the outcome already written but not yet struck. At 1,200 feet, the spiral tightened until the lines cut into his shoulders like wire, and the world became nothing but a blur of sky and dirt spinning past his eyes. His body whipped round and round, faster each second, the centrifugal pull pressing blood into his head so strong he felt his vision dim. The altimeter needle was dropping quick, a blur past the 1,000-foot mark, the last numbers flashing red in his mind. On the ground, the crowd's cries turned thin and strained, carried by the wind, but to David the world was only roaring air and the crushing weight of speed. His gloves slipped against the toggles, sweat making them slick, and still he pulled, but the tangled cords held like a knot that could never be undone. At 800 feet, the horizon was no longer wide but rushing straight up at him, the dirt fields now sharp, fences clear, cars small but detailed. A cruel irony played out before the eyes of the onlookers. The reserve chute that was meant to save him now dragged against the twisted main, the two working against each other, a failed partnership of cloth and cord. The very tool built for safety had become the trap that sealed his fate. His body, once so eager to leap into the sky, was now caught in the air's grip, powerless against the twist of nylon. The sound was thunder in his ears, air breaking around him at more than 120 miles per hour. His helmet rattled, his
The
teeth
worst
slammed together,
skydiving
his chest
accident
shook
in
with every slam of
history.
wind.
He was a
In
part
those
of a
final
group of
seconds,
22
his
who
thoughts
boarded
turned
a
not to
plane
numbers
for a
or
scheduled
knots,
jump.
but to the
But
dream that
6
had brought
weeks
him
later,
here,
he woke
the
up in
dream
a
of flight,
hospital and
of
injured.
breaking free from
Dan
gravity.
Bronsky
And in the
Chenfield was
cruelest way,
involved in
he
the
was
worst
free,
skydiving
but not in the way
accident
he
in
had wished.
history, where
At
the plane
400
he was
feet, the
in
crowd
went
went silent. The rescue jumper, still falling far above, knew the truth. He would never reach him in time. Ground control's voices broke into static, clipped words and gasps, as all hope fell with the man. A child near the fence wept into her mother's chest while seasoned jumpers removed their helmets, unable to watch. Then the impact came. The ground shuddered with a dull, heavy crack, louder than any gunshot, softer than any crash, but final all the same. Dust lifted in a thin ring around the spot, the broken lines and nylon fluttering weak in the air like a flag at half-mast. The harness tore under the strain, and yet, in bitter irony, David's helmet lay in the dirt untouched, not a crack along its surface, a piece of gear that endured what the body could not. The crowd froze, the silence louder than any scream. Rescuers rushed forward, their boots thudding across the hard-packed earth, carrying stretchers, carrying hope that was already gone. One bent low, hand trembling as he touched the chute lines, then shook his head, the smallest motion but heavier than any word. Others looked away, their shadows long in the morning sun, knowing that the sky had claimed another dreamer. Witnesses spoke later of how the earth seemed to take him in silence, no echo, no second sound, only stillness after the fall. The bright field where students once laughed now felt like a graveyard, the air still heavy with dust and sorrow. David's dream had ended not in the wide-open sky, but in the cruel truth of gravity, the force that never forgives. Above, the rescue jumper drifted down under a perfect canopy, his chute steady, his landing soft, a sharp contrast to the man he had tried to save. The metaphor hung cruel in the air, one life guided gently back, another torn down fast, both carried by the same wind. The same sky that had promised freedom had delivered death. Even as his body was lifted onto the stretcher, the field held a strange beauty. The twisted lines lay scattered like roots across the dirt, the white of the reserve fabric catching the light, glowing against the brown ground. It looked almost peaceful, almost like wings folded down, a reminder of the dream that had once seemed so bright. The silence after was not just grief, but a lesson carved into air and earth. The sky gives, and the sky takes, and no man, no matter how brave, can bend it to his will. The field was still when the sirens faded, the smell of dust and fuel mixing in the late morning air. People stood in small clusters, whispering low, their voices soft like wind through dry grass. The stretcher was carried away, the chute bundled beside it, fabric torn and dirt stained, and yet the helmet still shone bright, whole and unbroken, a cruel reminder of what had been lost. News spread quick, faster than the jump itself, moving from the airfield to nearby towns, then onto radios and papers. Skydiver killed in parachute failure, the headlines read, the words sharp, the story cut down to a few lines that hid the weight of the man who had fallen. The community of skydivers gathered that night, the hangar lit by a single lamp, the smell of oil and canvas thick. They spoke of David in hushed tones, of his wide smile, of the way he spoke of flying as if it were prayer. One veteran jumper placed his helmet on the table, tapping the scratches on its surface. "Every scar tells a story," he said, "and his will change ours." Rules were checked again, cords pulled and repulled, reserve chutes inspected until fingers bled. Safety officers spoke of automatic activation devices, small machines that could sense speed and height, set to fire the reserve chute at 750 feet if the jumper had not pulled. Before, they had been seen as extra, but after David's fall, they became law. Weeks later, a plaque was placed near the edge of the field, a small square of bronze no bigger than a shoebox lid. It carried only his name and the date, but those who trained there touched it before each jump, a silent promise to remember. Some said the wind always seemed to change near that spot, swirling a little faster, as if the air itself carried his memory. The children who had seen the fall grew older but spoke of it still, of the moment when the sky turned cruel and the earth turned final. David's story joined others, names etched in records, lives ended by tangled lines, missed pulls, or sudden gusts of wind. Each story was told not to frighten, but to remind. Skydiving schools played the tapes of accidents to students, voices low showing how a mistake or a knot could steal life in seconds. The past was kept alive so the future could be safer. Yet even with rules, with devices, with endless checks, the sky kept its danger. People still climbed into planes, still leaned into the open door, still chose to fall. Why? Some said it was pride, others said madness, but most said it was the hunger in the human heart, the pull to break free from Earth even for a moment, to touch the edge of something larger. To risk is to live, and though risk carries death, it also carries the spark of being more than ordinary. The field at Paris Valley still hears engines every morning, The same dry air, the same buzzing cicadas, the same rising balloon of dust when jumpers hit the ground in safety. And each time the circle closes, man against sky, sky against man. David's leap is part of that circle now, written into the very wind that whips across the runway. And so the question hangs in the air, heavier than gravity, lighter than hope. When your turn comes to stand at the open door and face the rushing wind, will you step forward into the sky, or will you turn back to the safety of the plane?